The engine was off, the heater running low. Snow rested on the curb like it was trying to soften what had just happened. Through the windshield of my old Ford sedan, I could see the Christmas lights. I'd hung myself blinking steadily as if nothing had changed. My name is Angela Hooper. I'm 59, a widow. And until that Christmas night I believed I still had a place in my own family. 2 black trash bags were in my back seat. One held sweaters I'd folded for years. The other held my medication, my late husband's photo, and the quilt my mother made before she died. When you're told to leave quickly, you don't pack logically. You pack emotionally. My phone was on speaker inside my coat pocket. My younger brother, Thomas, was inside the house. He'd stopped by after dinner with gifts, unaware that I wasn't there anymore. I heard his voice clearly through the cold air. "Danny," he asked, "where's your mother?" There was a pause long enough for hope to creep in. Then my son answered, calm and confident. "I told her to leave. I evicted her. This is our house now." The words didn't sound angry. They sounded final. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, staring at the wreath on the front door, the one that said home in white wooden letters. I'd hung it 2 weeks earlier, standing on a stool, telling myself that families fall apart slowly, not all at once. My son didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't hesitate. He said it like a man who believed he was right. And as I sat there listening to the house I paid for being claimed by someone I raised, I realized this wasn't just about being thrown out. It was about being erased. I didn't cry right away. Shock doesn't work like that. It moves quietly, organizing the damage while your body tries to understand what just happened from the driver's seat. I listened to my brother's voice inside the house. Thomas wasn't shouting. He never did. He asked questions instead, the way he always had when something felt wrong but no one wanted to admit it yet. "Evicted her?" he said slowly. "Danny, what do you mean you evicted her?" Daniel laughed. A short sound that carried through the cold air and landed somewhere behind my ribs. It was the same laugh he'd used when he was younger and thought something serious could be brushed off if he sounded confident enough. "She's been here a long time," he said. "Lydia and I need space. We're starting our life. Mom can stay somewhere else for a bit." Somewhere else. The words echoed in my head as I stared at the front porch. I'd painted those steps myself years ago, back when my knees still bent without complaint. Lydia's voice followed, light and careful. "She's been very emotional lately. It's healthier if we all have boundaries." Boundaries. I tasted the word like it was something foreign. For years I'd been the one stepping back, making room, lowering my voice so no one else felt uncomfortable. If that wasn't a boundary, I didn't know what was. Thomas asked, "Where is she right now?" "She left," Daniel said. "She packed and went." I gripped the steering wheel harder. The truth was simpler than that. The bags had been placed by my door. I'd been told it would be better if I didn't stay. The lock had clicked behind me while I stood on the porch, holding my coat closed with one hand and my dignity with the other. Thomas didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice had changed. Not louder, just firmer. "Danny, whose house is this?" "My house," Daniel said without hesitation. "My name's on it." My breathing went shallow. Memories rose uninvited. The bank office from years ago, the smell of paper and disinfectant. The weight of the pen in my hand as I signed my name over and over again. My husband, Robert, had been gone less than a year. A factory accident took him quickly, leaving me with a settlement check that felt like both a blessing and an insult. I used that money to buy the house, every dollar of it. Years later, after Daniel got his first steady job, after he sat at my kitchen table and told me he wanted to build a future, I added his name to the deed. 50%. I told myself that was what trust looked like. Trust doesn't announce when it's turning into leverage. Thomas spoke again. "Do you have the deed in the house?" There was a pause. Lydia answered this time. "Why would we? That stuff is digital now." "It matters," Thomas said. "Because you don't evict someone who still owns the property." The silence that followed was heavy. I could almost feel it pressing against the walls inside. My voice slipped out before I could stop it. Quiet. Thin. "I'm here." Thomas paused. "Evelyn." "In the car," I said. "Across the street." For a moment no one spoke. Then I heard movement, footsteps, the sound of the front door opening. I watched as Thomas stepped onto the porch, scanning the street until his eyes found me. He didn't run. He walked toward my car with the same steady pace he'd always had. When he reached the window, he leaned down, the porch light catching his face. "They did this to you," he said quietly. I nodded, suddenly aware of how small I felt sitting there. I didn't want to ruin Christmas. His jaw tightened. "They already did." He glanced at the trash bags in my backseat, then back at the house. Something settled in his expression. Something resolved. "I want you to stay right here," he said. "Lock your doors." He straightened and pulled out his phone, dialing with calm precision. I knew who he was calling before he said the name. Michael Grant, a civil attorney. As Thomas walked back toward the house, I stayed where I was. The car felt like a holding space between who I'd been and whoever I was about to become. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back looked tired, yes. But there was something else there too. Something awake. Across the street, the front door opened again, light spilling onto the porch. I straightened in my seat. Whatever came next would change things. I could feel it. The way you feel a shift in the air before a storm. This time I didn't look away. I waited. The cold pressed against the windows, but I barely noticed it. My attention was fixed on the front door, on the thin line of light beneath it, on the life that had continued without me for the last hour. When Thomas opened the door again, he didn't wave or gesture for me to hurry. He simply walked to the car and opened my door. "We're going inside," he said. My legs felt stiff as I stepped out. The pavement was slick with melting snow, and for a second I wobbled. Thomas's hand came out instinctively, steadying my elbow. That small, ordinary kindness nearly undid me. The warmth of the house hit me first. Then the smell, roasted meat, cinnamon, something sweet that had burned slightly in the oven. Christmas dinner half eaten. My eyes went to the dining table without permission. My plate was still set. My place was empty. Daniel stood near the couch, his shoulders tense. Lydia was by the kitchen island, her posture rigid. Thomas didn't sit down. He didn't remove his coat. He spoke as if time mattered. "I've spoken to Michael Grant. He's reviewing the deed now." Lydia scoffed softly. "This is unnecessary." Evelyn agreed to leave. I shook my head before I realized I was doing it. "I agreed not to argue," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, thin but steady. "That's not the same thing." Daniel looked at me, then really looked. There was confusion in his eyes, mixed with something like fear. "Mom, we talked about this. It's temporary." "Temporary has always been a dangerous word," I said. "It stretches until it breaks." Thomas turned to him. "Daniel, when was the last time your mother reviewed the deed?" Daniel hesitated. "I don't know. It's been years." "And the document you had her sign 6 months ago?" Thomas asked. "What did you tell her it was?" Lydia answered too quickly. "Just an update. Routine paperwork." Michael's voice came through Thomas's phone, clear and calm. "If the homeowner wasn't informed of the nature of the document, that's misrepresentation. Especially given her age." The word age landed hard. I didn't like it, but I understood it. It was a shield now, whether I wanted it or not. Lydia's face tightened. "So what? You're accusing us of a crime." Michael didn't raise his voice. "I'm advising you of risk." Thomas looked at Daniel. "Where is your father's ring?" The question seemed to confuse him. "What ring?" My chest tightened. I'd noticed it missing weeks ago but assumed I'd misplaced it. Lydia's eyes flicked toward her purse before she caught herself. Thomas followed her gaze. "Lydia." She exhaled sharply, then reached into her bag and placed the ring on the counter. Robert's ring, worn smooth after decades of work. The sight of it made my throat ache. I picked it up slowly, my fingers trembling. Thomas spoke again. "Here's what's going to happen. You have 72 hours to vacate the property. The house will be listed for sale. Evelyn will decide her next steps." Daniel's face drained of color. "You can't do that." "I can," Thomas said. "And I will." Silence filled the room, thick and uncomfortable. Lydia looked away first. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired. But beneath the exhaustion was something solid. Relief maybe. Or clarity. I looked at my son. "I loved you enough to trust you," I said quietly. "That doesn't mean you get to erase me." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Thomas gestured toward the door. "Evelyn." As I followed him back out into the cold, I glanced once more at the living room, at the couch where I'd folded laundry, at the kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals, at the space that had held my life for so long. For the first time it didn't feel like home. And strangely that didn't break me. It freed me. The days that followed were not dramatic. There were no shouting matches, no slammed doors. What there was instead was weight. The slow, heavy kind that settles into your bones and reminds you that endings are rarely clean. I stayed in a small rental apartment on the other side of town. One bedroom, beige walls, furniture that belonged to someone else. At night, the silence felt louder than the arguments ever had, but it was an honest silence. Nothing in it was pretending to be love. Thomas checked in every day. Sometimes he asked practical questions. Had I eaten? Did I sleep? Did I need anything? Other times he simply listened. He never told me how I should feel. That mattered more than he knew. The house went on the market 2 weeks later. I didn't attend the open houses. I couldn't stand the idea of strangers walking through rooms that still knew my footsteps. Michael handled the paperwork. Documents arrived in thick envelopes. I read every page slowly, glasses perched low on my nose, forcing myself not to rush past the details the way I used to. For years I'd signed things without reading because it was easier, because I trusted the people handing me the pen. I didn't do that anymore. Daniel moved out quietly. Lydia was gone before the second showing. Some nights, guilt crept in. It had a familiar voice. Told me I'd broken my family. That a better mother would have endured more. I'd sit on the edge of the bed, holding Robert's ring, and let those thoughts pass through me like weather. I didn't chase them. I didn't argue with them. They faded on their own. When the house sold, I felt something close to grief. But it wasn't for the walls or the roof. It was for the woman I'd been inside them. The one who believed love meant staying quiet. With the proceeds, I bought a small condo near the public library. It wasn't impressive. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a narrow balcony that faced a line of maple trees. But it was mine. Fully, legally, emotionally. The first night I slept there, I lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds. The hum of the refrigerator, distant traffic, someone coughing in another unit. I waited for the tightness in my chest to return. It didn't. I chose my furniture slowly. A chair that supported my back. A table just big enough for 2. I hung Robert's photograph in the living room, not because I felt obligated but because I wanted him there. In the evenings I sat with a cup of tea and watched the light shift across the walls, surprised by how peaceful it felt to take up space without apologizing for it. I enrolled in a watercolor class at the community center. On the first day my hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the brush. Everyone else seemed to know what they were doing. But the instructor smiled and told us there was no wrong way to begin. That stayed with me. Weeks passed, then months. My life settled into a rhythm that belonged to me. Morning walks, afternoons at the library, evenings that didn't require me to anticipate someone else's mood. I still missed my son. That didn't disappear. Love doesn't vanish just because it's wounded. But missing him no longer meant abandoning myself. One afternoon, nearly a year after that Christmas night, there was a knock at my door. I knew who it was before I opened it. Daniel stood there, hands in his pockets, shoulders slumped. He looked older, thinner. The confidence he used to wear so easily was gone. "Hi, Mom," he said. I stepped aside and let him in. Not because I owed him anything but because I wanted to see who he'd become. We sat at my small kitchen table. He noticed the painting I'd hung on the wall. He noticed the absence of Lydia. He noticed, I think, the way I sat straighter than I used to. "I've been in therapy," he said finally. I didn't understand how much I was letting someone else speak for me. I listened. I didn't interrupt. Listening is different when you're no longer waiting to be convinced. "I'm sorry," he said. "For all of it." I believed he meant it. That surprised me. "I forgive you," I said. The words came easily, without effort. But forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to how things were. He nodded slowly. "I know." When he left, I stood on the balcony and watched his car disappear down the street. My chest ached, but it didn't collapse. That night I slept deeply. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't surviving my life. I was living it. After Daniel left that afternoon, I didn't clean the kitchen right away. His coffee cup was still on the table, a faint ring forming beneath it. Once that would have bothered me. I would have wiped it instantly, afraid of marks, afraid of disorder, afraid that any sign of mess meant I was failing at something. This time I let it sit. I stood by the window and watched the light fade between the trees outside my condo. The air felt heavy, not because something bad had happened but because something honest had. Forgiveness doesn't arrive the way people expect. It doesn't feel like relief at first. Sometimes it feels like exhaustion. The deep kind that comes after carrying a weight for too long and finally setting it down. In the weeks after Daniel's visit, we spoke occasionally. Short conversations. No expectations hiding between sentences. Sometimes he asked about my painting class. Sometimes I asked how he was sleeping. We were learning how to speak to each other without guilt filling the empty spaces. I never invited him to stay overnight. He never asked. On quiet mornings, I sat on my balcony with a cup of coffee and listened to the neighborhood wake up. Different sounds than the old house, different rhythms, but I liked them. They reminded me that life continues even when it no longer looks the way you imagined it would. What stayed with me most wasn't the moment I was told to leave. It was the moment I realized I could stay gone. Not out of anger, not to punish anyone, but because returning would have meant shrinking myself back into a shape that nearly erased me. I used to think boundaries were walls meant to keep people out. Now I understand they're the structure that keeps you standing when others lose their balance. I forgave my son because carrying anger would have poisoned the years I still had ahead of me. Forgiveness was something I did for myself, not something I offered as a reward. But forgiveness didn't mean pretending nothing had happened. It didn't mean reopening doors that had almost closed me in for good. It meant choosing myself without bitterness. On the anniversary of Robert's death, I placed his ring in a small wooden box beside our wedding photo. Not as a symbol of loss, but as proof that I had loved deeply and survived it. That mattered. Some nights, doubt still whispered. It asked whether I'd been too harsh, whether a better mother would have endured more. I let those questions pass without answering them. I'd learned that not every voice deserves a response, especially the ones that ask you to disappear. That Christmas, 1 year after everything fell apart, I spent the evening quietly. I cooked a simple meal. I lit a candle. I watched the snow gather along the railing outside my window. No one told me to leave. No one decided my worth. I chose peace over proximity, clarity over tradition, self-respect over familiarity. And in that stillness, I understood something I wish I'd known much earlier in life. Being a mother does not require you to erase yourself. Love does not demand that you give up your place in the world. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do, especially later in life, is remain standing when everyone expects you to step aside. I didn't lose my family that Christmas. I found myself. And that, at last, was enough. Sometimes late at night I think about the woman I used to be. The one who believed love was something you earned by giving more than you had. I don't judge her anymore. She did the best she could with what she understood at the time. But I'm not her now. Now I know that staying kind does not require staying small. That family does not get to define you by how much you are willing to lose. And that dignity, once reclaimed, changes the way you walk through the world. I carry that knowledge with me every day. Quietly. Firmly. Without apology.